Hi everybody, this video is part 2 of my session report and review for Axis and Allies Guadalcanal. We left off at the start of turn 4 where the USA will have the initiative. Before we kick off the action, I will provide a quick summary of what has happened thus far. On turn 1, the US took Guadalcanal and Maleta from Japan with little difficulty. On turn 2, the two sides fought over Santa Isabel and the Americans won control of the island. On turn 3, the Japanese triggered a massive naval battle north of New Georgia where they actually defeated the Americans on the seas and barely held off in an invasion. At present, it is fair to say that both sides are worn down equally in air power, and although Japan now has a substantial surface fleet advantage, they have taken consistent heavy losses fighting the US Marines on land. I suspect the US still might be in a stronger strategic position. And so the aftermath of the first big battle of New Georgia to begin turn 4 is as follows. With significant losses and substantial damages, the US Navy pulls back, now south of Santa Isabel towards the east end of the slot. Their battleship will rendezvous with the carrier south of New Georgia where they can cover a now very large second amphibious landing or invasion of the island. Only the little ships must now stand in the way of the Japanese vanguard and submarines. America cannot risk any more capital ships in the slot at this time. They're still reeling from the previous engagement. Lastly, the Americans will make use of their 2 Coast Watcher tokens. They will move 2 loaded transports out of sequence. Japan thinks America plans to land everything on New Georgia. Much to their surprise, they will find out later, this is not the case. This turn, more than ever, the IJN had a very difficult decision to make. If they were to take the most aggressive action available, an all-out move farther east, ultimately they would expose their carriers unnecessarily for not much gain since the US withdrew their capital ships. Moving to the west, back to cover a relief landing from the north into New Georgia, now seems like a lost cause. The Americans can simply get there faster with more power. At best, the Japanese might delay the fall of New Georgia for one more turn, only to then find themselves right back to square one with that operation. The solution is believed to be recapturing Santa Isabel once and for all to temporarily make up for the inevitable loss of New Georgia. They will split their fleet in half. The carriers will sail north to cover the invasion of Santa Isabel. The remainder of the surface fleet will chase down and eliminate the US destroyer detachment that is covering Guadalcanal and access to the US main body south of New Georgia. The results of turn 4 moves are as follows. To begin with, I have to mention that Japanese submarines record a success finally. Prior to the main battle resolution, they force a US destroyer to retire back to New Caledonia with damage. To the north, the Japanese invade Santa Isabel in force. There is an air component to this action as well. In the center of the board, the Japanese surface vanguard expects to clear out the seas south of Santa Isabel. The Japanese still have a powerful group of very capable cruisers at their disposal. The Americans provide a token amount of air support for the little ships who must now do their best just to buy some time for the rest of the US fleet. In the south, America plans to plow under whatever Japanese stragglers are still left alive on New Georgia. Japan offers their beleaguered garrison some moral support in the form of an airstrike against the approaching invasion fleet. Here's what happened. Above Santa Isabel, another costly air battle. Both sides lose 2 more planes, 2 fighters for the Japanese, and a fighter and a bomber for the US. On land, the Japanese defeated the Americans. They rolled well for once and finally recaptured the island. They killed 3 US infantry and 1 artillery for only 2 infantry losses of their own. So for every victory, there is a price, and in this case, there was an even bigger one nobody really anticipated. The Japanese lost an aircraft carrier in this engagement due to a lack of adequate screening vessels. As it stood, there was a 1 in 6 chance of something like this happening based on the arrangement of forces that were in play. Japan discounted the risk, and Murphy's Law reared its ugly head. It's just brutal luck. On the waters south of the island, another unexpected outcome. The little ships of the US Navy held their own. They sank 2 Japanese destroyers and damaged an enemy cruiser before being driven off. They suffered 1 sunk themselves. all other units damaged. Additionally, the Japanese lost a fighter plane in that engagement. So although on the one hand the US destroyers made a good account of themselves, they unfortunately did not diminish the Japanese submarine threat or hold the sea zone. The significance of all of this is to be determined. New Georgia in the south was an American victory, as expected. At the last minute, the U.S. diverted 2 loaded transports away to the east to cover Malaita. The Marines, however, lost a unit in the invasion, but far more seriously, after a costly air battle, a Japanese bomber snuck through American air defenses and knocked out the American battleship covering the invasion. So when it was all said and done, after turn 4 combat, no less than 5 American ships got sent back to New Caledonia with damage. The U.S. captures New Georgia. The Japanese take Santa Isabel. The Japanese Air Force is decimated. The U.S. surface fleet is effectively out of action, out of position for one whole turn. About half of America's resources will be spent fixing their damaged fleet. They spend the rest of their money on rushing 2 fighters directly onto the map, one in a 1-cost zone and another into a 2-cost supply zone. Japan builds 2 transports with a 2 supply premium to rush them onto the map. They also buy 1 bomber, 1 anti-aircraft gun, and 3 supply tokens. Heading into turn 5, the US has a 1-point lead. The score is now 14-13. Japan will have the initiative next turn, and they might even be in a position to score more points than America to finish the game. It's turn 5. This round will be different. Both sides find themselves so depleted and run down, they decide they need to take time to reform and resupply. Neither side will launch any conventional attacks. Rather, they will regroup and prepare for offensive actions on the next turn. Japan has the initiative. They will land forces on Choiseul and they will reinforce Santa Isabel. Their surface fleet will sail west back through the slot. They aim to link back up with an aircraft carrier. Japan's second carrier will guard Bougainville. There's not much going on as far as America is concerned. They are reforming around Guadalcanal. The second carrier group will sail west to avoid Japanese submarines. The most important thing that will happen this round, in fact, is related to this factor, and it will occur at the tail end of Japan's movement phase. Japan must now commit its submarines against the American carrier south of Malaita. The carrier can't run anywhere, at least it's not willing to retreat back to New Caledonia. The entire Pacific Fleet will be there to support it. The Japanese subs will only get 1 chance to even up the score before they are themselves destroyed. The Japanese are down a single point just as total scores are about to pass the end game threshold. So this move is a necessary sacrifice. The Japanese will have a 3d6 chance to roll a 1. America will risk the carrier to eliminate this immediate sub threat. If they're right, they win the game. So I'll do the roll live. The outcome of this engagement will determine whether or not we see a tiebreaker round 6. Okay, so we've set up the most important engagement of the game thus far. Japanese submarines form up in the optimal anvil attack configuration. And they're about to roll their attack dice. What's your official prediction? I'm going to say, let's say the Japanese actually get a hit. You just need one of these dice to be a 1, so let's see what happens. Yep. It's just par for the course for the Japanese this game. Just didn't get the dice at the critical times. So, this will hand America a 1-point victory at the end of round 5. I may have spoken too soon about the absence of any standard attacks this round, turn 5. But before I continue, I should mention the Japanese submarines did not survive. The US rolled 9 dice in defense and scored 3 hits total off camera. And so, upon further review, the Japanese come to the realization that there is in fact one last desperate act available to them that may yet extend the war. I think you might be able to guess where this is going. I overlooked this possibility earlier. Let's zoom in for a closer look at the bottom left-hand corner of the board. So if the Japanese commit whatever is left of their air force, every last plane they have, and commit it all against the American ships, in C-Zone E. There is a chance, however small, they might still snatch victory out of the jaws of defeat. Here is the arrangement of forces. Japan summons their young pilots of the Divine Wind to die a heroic death for the Emperor. Against near impossible odds, they will set off for their final fight. I had the camera rolling to record the action since the outcome of the game hinged on what was about to happen. So you can see here, this was the final setup, final battle of the game. One of the Japanese fighters came from Carrier, I think it was north of New Georgia. Bomber from Bougainville, and then another American bomber from Guadalcanal. And do the Japanese roll first. You can see they actually got 3 hits and wiped out the American Air Force. So that's really an interesting outcome, really. Another example of something too little too late. But the Americans still get to return fire with their 5 dice, 2 for each fighter, and then the bomber. And you can see the roll here that I did was kind of surprising because they only got 1 hit. That's the third die that came out. And I just lined them up, and it was a fighter. So that meant that 1 Japanese bomber and 1 Japanese fighter got through. So they would have another opportunity at 3d6 just to roll a 1 to extend the game into an overtime. If they rolled 2 1s, they would win the game, and 0 1s, they would lose. So here comes the final roll, and once again, there's just no luck at the crucial moments. So that was it. America wins by a single point on the 5th round. Even though it's supposed to be summer, it's cold and windy outside. So to end this video, I decided to do a quick segment where I share some of my early impressions of Axis and Allies Guadalcanal after just 1 playthrough. I have to say I found it to be very enjoyable. I was pleasantly surprised with it in general, and this might even be one of my favorite versions of Axis and Allies moving forward. Even though I really like it, I still think it would only be fair if I also mentioned some minor shortcomings against the game's better qualities. I don't even like to say shortcomings, I'd prefer to say little minuses. For example, in some instances, the board just can't handle the amount of action in play. It's deceptive, really, because most of the sea spaces seem huge, except for the most important one, which isn't. So be prepared to have to occasionally time out, move stuff off board, and improvise. And that was unexpected. Also, unless you play aggressively, you kind of have to anyway. You could start to run low on certain minis, even with the inclusion of chips. So I detect a tiny hint of cost cutting, despite the otherwise high production quality of what you do get. But on the other hand, I've seen a lot worse examples of this recently. And the only other drawback I felt in the design was related to the overall scope and scale of the game. There's not an embarrassment of options open to either side in terms of strategy. What if the US Navy moves into the east end of the slot on turn 2? Might that be an example of optimal gameplay? And if it is, Japan has no choice but to do either A or B, and it's not going to be much more complicated than that for the rest of the game. Japan takes Santa Isabel because it's easier for them to hold. USA takes New Georgia for the exact same reason. And Japan has a couple of turns, literally, to make something happen, or they lose by a single point in and around turn 5 because New Georgia holds 2 airstrips and Santa Isabel can only take 1. Most games will be some variation of that, I think. But are any of these critical observations deal breakers? They're not for me, because I believe there's a heck of a lot of fun to be had playing out the battles. As far as some of the questions I posed at the start of my part 1 video, I feel I found answers to all of them even after my very first playthrough. Combat system, I like it. It works. Of course, it's a bit more fiddly than traditional A&A. For example, you can't really eyeball a large battle in seconds, just grab a mitt full of dice and resolve large battles without any thought. There's that extra step in there where you have to line up the dice and work out what exactly takes hits. Is that extra step worth it? I would say for this operational setup, for this Pacific War scenario, it is. Once you get used to it, it's no trouble at all. In practice, the new rules and hit chart allow for some very interesting and sometimes unpredictable outcomes. And it just seems to fit better with this particular narrative. Remember, the scope of the conflict area is quite confined. So there has to be some mechanism for enhanced variability since neither side has a lot of freedom to really outmaneuver the other. It's not terribly asymmetrical either in terms of what tools of war are available to either side to start the game. Everything seems sensibly balanced. I actually do get some of the quirky unit characteristics as well that I made note of earlier. Artillery in particular, sea combat factor, I think, is there to keep players sharp and honest about opposed amphibious landings. You always need adequate screening vessels to make successful landings, kind of like how it was in real life. So I even appreciate some of the surface level perceived weirdness inherent in the design. Over half the fun for me was derived from just buying the pieces and setting up the battles. Either side has enough resources to get at least one of any unit they want every turn. Players don't feel strapped or poor in this game, so feel free to purchase any combination of various replacement pieces from turn to turn. And yet, due to the fact that either side is very capable and can always move and counter move to thwart the other, certain elements of the game will always pose a challenge. It's hard to get that fourth airstrip built. It's hard to actually bomb runways. It's hard to swing AA guns into action before the game ends, and so on and so forth. Overall, I think there is quite a lot of replay value here. Playing solo was okay, but I'm going to try something different next time I play solitaire. One thing I thought might be fun is to do the buy phase and then before next movement, write out potential actions or options or plans for each side. And these may be detailed or generalized, but whatever they are, make die rolls to pretend which of these orders you must effect coming from a higher command. For solitaire players, this could be one way to keep your version of history more interesting and unpredictable. So I'm going to do that next time. I was also satisfied with the abbreviated victory point scale and total game length. If anything, it makes me want to play again sooner rather than later. I do wish we could get a total Pacific War map to fit this Guadalcanal game engine. And I wonder, could we not modify ANA Pacific 2001 to incorporate this combat system? I think I'm going to have to look into that. See if I can come up with something workable. Anyway, ANA Guadalcanal for me is a big hit. So don't be surprised if I come back with more stuff related to it someday. Thanks for watching and stay tuned for more content coming soon.